Hi, I'm Jeff Zeig, and I'm the founder and the director of the Milton Erickson Foundation. Here I am in Phoenix, Arizona, with another 5-minute video for improving your practice as a psychotherapist. The topic that I want to address today is depression. Now, we can think about depression as being something that's really crippling to those who suffer from it. One of the main problems with depression is anhedonia. Anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure. So when you're talking with somebody who's depressed and you say, wow, it's a beautiful day, the sun is shining, go out and enjoy life, it's something that they're really not capable of doing because of this crippling anhedonia. Nothing seems to be pleasurable. Now, one of the things that I advise my students is don't treat the category, understand the components. So one of the things that we can do if we're treating the problem, like depression, is to understand what is depression made of, psychologically, socially, emotionally, attitudinally, perceptually. Try to think of all of the categories of human experience and create a map. How is this person doing depression? For example, one way that a person could be doing depression is by being internally preoccupied. One way that a person can do depression perceptually is by having dark images. One way that a person can do depression is by having negative thoughts. One way is not to have goals, not to have an orientation into the outcome that they want to achieve. One way that people can have depression is certainly by feeling hopeless and helpless. One way that person can do depression is feeling that they're a victim of life. One way the person can do depression is by withdrawing. One way of doing depression is by being negative. Now, those are generic ways that a person can do depression. How does this person that you're talking to do depression? Once you can create a map of how the person is doing depression, then it's easy to think, how would this person do happiness? If you take the way in which the person is doing depression and you reverse it, then you can think, okay, one way of doing happiness is to be more externally oriented, to be noticing the good things that there are in the world, to have goals, to be connected with people, to be doing things that are meaningful, to become active rather than passive, to be positive rather than negative. Now, every depressed person, no matter how difficult their depression, somewhere in their history, they have done all of those positive things. So then one aspect, one way of doing psychotherapy is to think about waking up the components that have existed but which are now dormant. How can we stimulate this person into being more active? How can we stimulate this person into seeing more of the positive things that exist in the world? Being connected, having goals, being hopeful, being a victor in life rather than a victim in life. And then this is a series of using, for example, strategic tasks. Or, for example, using forms of hypnotic communication. For example, using imagery. For example, giving people simple assignments about being more socially useful, journaling some of the good things, doing acts of charity, acts of gratitude. And gradually, by redintegrating, now that's a strange psychological term, you redintegrate a state by a series of partial cues. You create enough partial cues so that the state emerges. And one way of working with depression is by thinking about, how is this person doing depression? How can I create a map? And then how can I begin to set the person on a train of activity that awakens the components that have been there but are now dormant, and that by the process of redintegration begins to build the state. And when we look into, for example, the work of Milton Erickson, we see that in working with many different kinds of people who are suffering from depression, Erickson would set them on strategic tasks that would help them to begin to make small alterations in the system, make minimal changes in the system that begin to snowball into a more robust effect. Every person who's been depressed has experience at being happy. Awaken up the components of happiness and help that person to achieve a more adaptive, effective way of living. This is Jeff Zeig from the Milton Erickson Foundation with another 5-minute tip about how you can think about being a better therapist. Thank you.